Today, we are going to talk about a subject that is extremely important, especially when it comes to corporate environments, but one where people are significantly undertrained in. We are talking about facilitation. Facilitation is when you are leading a meeting and you have many other people in the meeting and you have to ensure engagement. You have to make sure people get their ideas out, they feel heard, there is an atmosphere of trust and safety, and by the end of it, you achieve the objectives of the meeting, and everyone in the meeting feels engaged and they feel like they got something out of it. But unfortunately, this is not a skill set many people have, including people at the top of the organization. I'll tell you a quick story. I was once part of an organization where whenever we would have company meetings, the senior leader, he would always ask us for opinions and ask us for questions. And usually in company meetings, when you have 50, 60 people, they start presenting for about half an hour and then they say, does anyone have any questions? And because we've been silent for so long, usually no one will say anything unless there's a 15-second pause, and just to kill the awkwardness, someone just volunteers and starts speaking. So one of these times in a company presentation, a question was posed, but no one was saying anything. So I felt, okay, let me just save the day and give some input. So they said something like, what do you think about this thing? And I said, hey, I have something to say. They said, Yasser, go ahead. And then I shared my opinion. I said, when you mention XYZ, this is my thought. This is what I think we can do. These are my ideas. And I felt like I added to the conversation. And when I was finished talking, the leader, the senior leader in the organization said, okay, does anyone else have anything to add? And in that moment, I remember feeling so unrecognized, feeling like me volunteering to help out with a meeting was not rewarded. And in that moment, I realized most people just don't know how to get people to engage and enjoy a meeting or facilitate a discussion in a meeting. Because imagine if you have 60 people in a company meeting, many of whom who have great ideas, but you don't empower them and you don't make them feel safe, they're not going to share their ideas. So today I'm going to share some tactics with you that will help you become a good facilitator. Now let's say you join a room, a Zoom room we're talking about here, or maybe it could be an in-person. What you don't want to do, number one, is wait for someone else to do something. So when you enter a room, you don't just want to see other people, not make eye contact, or if you're on Zoom, join a meeting, say nothing, and just sit still. Because what this does is, it A, creates a lot of awkwardness, and B, it creates uncertainty because you haven't acknowledged other people, especially if you don't know the people in the room. They're wondering, who is this person? Is this person going to talk? Why are they not saying anything? And when other people are feeling anxious and shy, and then you join in or someone else joins in and they also don't say anything, everyone's just looking at each other to do something. So it's a very awkward first 60 seconds, and then it sets the tone for the rest of the meeting. So instead, what you want to do is you just want to say something. You just want to acknowledge someone else in the room. So you can join in and say, hey, Michael, good to see you. Hey, Jessica, how are you doing? Hey, Ellie, nice to meet you for the first time. That's it. That's all it takes, because now you've acknowledged their presence. They feel visible. And they also now know, hey, this person's open to talking, open to a conversation. I can let loose a little bit. So nothing's worse than joining a meeting where no one says anything for the first 15 seconds and someone just waiting for someone to take up initiative. You can be that person. And it immediately sets you as the leader because you are the one who took charge. So that's number one. Take initiative. Don't just be quiet and not acknowledge other people around you. The next thing you want to do in a meeting is you want to get a pulse check. And a pulse check could be making sure everyone's on the same page about the meeting, making sure people are ready to present if someone's got their slides ready, making sure we have everyone in the room, making sure we have the proper amount of time allotted. Because you'll be surprised how many times you'll show up to a meeting and you're supposed to discuss something that was sent in an email, but no one's actually read the email, and everyone's just pretending like they read the email, and now you're having a discussion without anyone having the knowledge. Or what happens is you start the meeting and you plan for an hour, and you have your slides ready, but then you realize the other person has back-to-back meetings and they have to leave in 30 minutes. So all of this can be rectified if we just do a pulse check at the start. Hey, I just wanted to make sure, do we still have 60 seconds? Okay. I know Michael was joining. Is he still joining? I see he's not in the meeting. Great. Now you've gotten a pulse check of where everybody else is at. And then you can also ask, hey, I know I sent that email about XYZ. I want to make sure that we've gone through the material. Is it okay if we just discuss this for the first 2 minutes? Because you'll realize, I think Jeff Bezos said this in the podcast with Lex Fridman. He said, a lot of times senior executives will show up to a meeting and just pretend like they've done their homework, a lot like we would do in school, but they haven't read the email, they haven't read the slide deck, they haven't read the document, and they just nod their head. So you want to make sure that everyone's on the same page. They're informed before you have a discussion. So this is why, number 2, doing a pulse check around time, how everyone's feeling, is the material ready. Again, this is you taking initiative. This is you acknowledging other people's needs and making sure they're comfortable before beginning the meeting. Number 3, let's talk about safety and trust. Now, one of the biggest challenges for me was getting people to feel safe and getting people to feel like they can trust you to speak up, because especially if you're a entry-level employee and you join a meeting with your boss and your senior boss, you feel very judged. You feel like you have to perform and you don't want to say anything stupid. So there isn't a lot of safety in that situation. So it's really important to make other people feel safe in that situation to voice their concerns. So when you're in a room with other members that you might not know, let's say you're leading the meeting, and everyone joins the meeting, everyone's got a straight face, it can be very intimidating and people can seem very unfriendly, to the point where you might not even feel safe enough to speak up or share your feelings. You know what's really easy that you can do to alleviate this issue? Just smile. Just smile, because it makes you look more approachable. Because nothing's worse than joining a meeting that's very awkward, but people are just sitting there with a straight face and no one's saying anything. Now you don't want to be that first person to speak up. So instead, just smile and make people feel comfortable by saying something. Hey, good to see you here. I'm looking forward to what you have to share. And by the way, if you have any questions, feel free to ask me or type it in the chat below. Give them some options to safely express themselves, because many people have been jaded by trying to share their opinion and not being acknowledged, especially like the story that I shared earlier. So you want to create a safe environment for people to have that discussion. Now, something else you can do is when you are doing Q&As or when you want someone's opinion on something, it's very common to say, does anyone have any questions? And what usually happens when you say that, does anyone have any questions? For the first 15 seconds, 20 seconds, no one really says anything. You're looking around. Worse yet, the person, when they ask that question, does anyone have any questions? They don't even wait 2 seconds and they say, okay, no one has any questions. All right, everyone, have a good meeting. Have a good day. Let's end it here. Because they're so afraid of the silence. So instead, what you want to do, this is what I like to do in meetings. I like to ask specific people what their takeaway was. And it's not like you're putting them on the spot. You pick people who you've seen some engagement from. So if someone's looking away the entire time or not paying attention, you don't want to put them on the spot and say, hey, I noticed you weren't really paying attention. What did I just say? That's not a good way to do it. But instead, if you're seeing someone not the whole time, you can say something like, for example, there's this member in my public speaking class. His name is Marwan, and he's always smiling and he's always nodding. So whenever we're at the end of the meeting, I always say, Marwan, when I was talking about this, you were smiling. What do you think about this? And then he'll unmute and he'll say, yeah, I was just thinking X, Y, Z. So now I haven't just thrown the question at the entire meeting, hoping someone jumps in on it. I've acknowledged certain people. I've made them feel recognized as if I saw what they were doing. I was observing them. I recognized their participation. And then I asked them for their opinion. Because if you say, does anyone have any questions? A big chance that no one's going to say anything. But if you say, I noticed some people were really nodding their head there. Abigail, I noticed that when I was talking about XYZ, you were making some notes down. Do you have any thoughts about that? And you also want to ask the question in a way where they have an out. So in case you called them out and they have nothing to say, you don't want them to feel embarrassed. So you can say, do you have any thoughts to share or any thoughts around that or anything that's particularly stood out for you? those questions are safe enough for people to share their feedback around. And what will happen is once you ask one person a question and they respond and they feel safe in that environment, other people realize, oh, this person raised their hand, nothing happened to them, now I can do it. Remember in class when the teacher would ask a question and then you really want to raise your hand, but maybe you wouldn't, and then someone else raises their hand and they say what you wanted to say and you feel like, oh, I should have done it. And then the next time they ask a question, you raise your hand. It's the same exact idea. People just feel a sense of safety when they see someone else do it first. So again, going back to taking initiative and taking people's names. That will be number 4. Number 5 is reward positive behavior. We want to reward someone when they share an opinion. We want to reward people when they are participating and adding to it. And this could also mean adding to the conversation in a way that goes against what you're teaching or goes against your method. So I'll give you an example. Sometimes I'm doing a public speaking session and I'm talking about body language, or if I'm talking about how to start a speech, how to end a speech, and someone will ask a question, well, actually, I don't really like when people do that because X, Y, Z. Or I think that's really boring. I don't think we should need to do X, Y, Z. Now, it's very easy for me to get defensive. Actually, no, I've done this for very, very long. We should do this. But this does not create a safe environment. So the first thing I will do is I'll thank them. So I'll say, thank you so much. I love that you brought that up. And this is the beauty of a discussion, that I can teach something, but people will have different opinions based on what they see. And speaking skills are a lot like your preference in music. You might like one person's speaking style, you might not like another one's. And you ask someone else and they'll have the opposite opinion. So I'm really glad you pointed that out. So notice how even though they had a differing opinion, I praised them for it and I built it into what I was teaching. So in a similar way, not all the time will you have people who are that bold who will just say, hey, I disagree with this, but you just want to think about how you can reward people. One of the best things I can tell you to do, and this is the opposite of what the senior leader in my organization did, which was, okay, does anyone else have any questions? You want to thank them for specifically what they did. So for example, if you said, Rob, what are your thoughts around that? And Rob says, actually, I think we can do ABC. So instead of saying, thank you, Rob, does anyone else have anything to add? You can say, oh, thank you, Rob. I love how you mentioned XYZ. I hadn't thought about that before. We might want to think about that later. Anyone else have anything to add to that? Now you've given Rob something specific that you are recognizing, something specific that you are rewarding. So whenever someone engages, you want them to be rewarded. Because then in the future, when you have future meetings, they will want to contribute because now they feel safe, now they feel recognized. Many people, especially in corporate, they go their entire lives doing hard work and they never get any sort of recognition. They're completely invisible. Their manager barely recognizes them. They don't really have a lot of input. So when they finally get the chance to say something and other people like what they say and they compliment them publicly, you are rewarding positive behavior. So when you're facilitating a meeting and you get people to say something, try to reward their behavior as much as you can. Some other ways that you can get participation, you don't always have to get someone to say something long-winded. Something I like to do is if I'm in a really big room, I can't just ask someone a question because when they speak up, their voice is not going to be loud enough, or maybe I haven't really built up trust with them. So one of the first things I'll do is if I'm doing a session about public speaking anxiety, for example, I'll say something like, I used to be very afraid of public speaking. I would be terrified. The night before I couldn't sleep, and 10 minutes leading up to the meeting, I'm so concerned about going up on stage that I can't think about anyone else. Raise your hand if you felt that way before. And all the hands would go up. Now this is two things. One, I've shared a story about me feeling that way. So now everyone feels very comfortable. If I just showed up and said, raise your hand if you're afraid of public speaking, there isn't a lot of safety. No one wants to admit it because they don't know if other people feel the same way. But if I share as an expert, hey, I'm afraid of public speaking, does anyone else feel that way? Now people feel very comfortable. And the bar for them to participate in my speech or my presentation is very low. All they have to do is raise their hand. That's all they have to do. So the simpler you make it for them to engage, the more they're likely to engage. So if I said, instead of raising your hand, I said, okay, scream out loud, I have also experienced this. You will have very, very few people do it, or maybe they'll mumble it to themselves, or maybe a few extroverts will just say something out loud. So you don't just want to say something that most people won't do unless you build up enough trust and you've done a few exercises, you've trained them to participate. So give them some gestures that they can do. Something I'll also do is on my Zoom meetings, I'll say, if this makes sense, give me a thumbs up. And people will give me a thumbs up. That's a specific gesture, so I know they're listening to me. So give them something to do that makes them participate. You also want to allow them, this is point number 9, allow them to ask clarification questions. Sometimes what happens is when you're talking in a meeting and people don't understand something, they don't want to admit that they did not understand, because there's some psychological component there where people feel if I say I don't know anything, I'm going to sound stupid. But if they don't clarify and you just continue talking, then they'll be misunderstood, they won't understand the message, and chances are many other people feel the same way. So we're missing a really big opportunity here. So you want to give people a way to ask for clarification. So for example, one of the ways that I do this, I'll say, okay, I'm going to talk to you about how to grow your social media following. I'm going to talk about how I did it, what kind of videos I make, how long it took. And after every 10 minutes, every segment, I'm going to stop to ask if you have any questions. I want to make sure you feel understood. So as I'm talking, just write down your questions and then I'll address your questions and then we'll go from there. Is that okay? Give me a thumbs up. And then people will give me a thumbs up and then we'll continue. So this way now they know they have permission to ask questions. I'm training them that I need their participation. Because what happens is you can build momentum with people of not getting them to engage. Here's what I mean. Let's say you join a presentation or a speech, and corporations are notorious for this, and someone dumps information on you for 45 minutes. And then they say, does anyone have any questions? Because you have been trained for the past 45 minutes to stay quiet, you have to do a lot now to speak up. You have to be the first one to speak up when no one else has said anything. And this creates a barrier. So if you can get their engagement very, very early on, as early as possible, and this could be raise your hand or say your name or anything that you can get them to say early on, it just trains them that, hey, this is one of those presentations where I am going to need to participate or I can voice myself. This is a conversation. Now they will give you a lot more feedback. They will ask you a lot more questions, and they're also going to sound a lot more engaged. Now, the last point I'll mention, point number 10, there are some people in a meeting who are naturally very extroverted and they're not afraid of sharing their thoughts and asking questions. When I'm in a workshop, I'm teaching public speaking, there's always a couple of people who raise their hands. And then they raise their hand at the next point, and the next point, and the next point. And then what tends to happen is the Q&A is dominated by people who are very confident, and those people who don't feel as confident, they don't raise their hand and their questions are not answered. So the way to fix this could be, A, you can get them to submit questions anonymously or privately. So on Zoom, you can say, if you have any questions, just send me a quick direct message and I'll address your question. This way, other people can't see what their question is. They feel anonymous, and you can answer, and then they feel safe. So again, how can I make this person feel as safe as possible? What you might also want to do is you want to have some sort of mechanism where they can submit a question, because not everyone's going to feel comfortable, especially if you're in person, to grab a mic and line up and ask you a question. You can say, okay, write down your questions on this chit, put it in a little bucket, and I'm going to address the questions at the end of it. This way, you know they're going to get a chance. What you can also do is, if you are doing any sort of interactive element, you can give them a heads up. So for me, when I'm doing my public speaking workshops, I say, okay, let's get divided up into groups of 3, and I'm going to ask at least one of you to share what your opinion is. So just pick one person from your group who's going to share that. So when they do that, they already know by the end of the presentation, by the end of the exercise, they're going to have to share their thoughts. So they're mentally prepared for that. So these different methods will allow you not to just get the extroverts to open up and share their opinions and ask their questions, but also the introverts, the people who are not very confident right off the get-go. So the skill of facilitation, it goes hand in hand with public speaking. It is the ability to coordinate a discussion between many different parties in a virtual environment or an in-person environment where everyone feels seen, heard, recognized in a safe setting. And I can tell you this, even at the highest level, this is a rare skill set. But if you just join a meeting and you greet people right away, especially if you are someone who is new to the industry, new to the role, and you have a big smile on your face, and you're doing a pulse check, and you're encouraging others to safely share what's on their mind, ask questions, and you reward positive behavior. You don't wait on other people to speak up and give you permission. And at the same time, you're asking questions yourself and you're asking for clarification. If you just do this, this will make you not only a master facilitator, but also an incredible leader.